Welcome back, everybody, to the Uncensored CMO. Now, in this episode, I'm going to be meeting up with the CMO of Brand Finance's strongest UK brand, EY. Rebecca Hirst has been there for the last 3 years. Prior to that, she was at Samsung and at Coke. We talk about what happens when you go from B2C to B2B and how do you build the strongest brand, and many, many other life lessons that she's learned along the way. This is a fascinating episode. It almost turns into therapy, in fact. So if you're ready for that, then you want to listen. Here it is. Now, I'm talking to the winner of the Brand Finance Strongest Brand of the Year, which is EY, and their CMO, Rebecca Hirst. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, lots of congratulations, right? So you've not only won Brand Finance Brand of the Year, last year you were a top 100 effective marketer, and you've just won Campaigns 40 over 40.
40 over 40.
I'm particularly happy about that.
Yeah, me too.
Because I just think it's probably the category that as you get older, the net widens for you.
I just love the fact that Campaign is celebrating age and experience and wisdom, and that it's something that people can look up to. So a few people pinged me afterwards and said, I'm so glad that you've done this, because we feel like people disappear later in life in this industry. And I nearly did that myself, but we can come back to that. I nearly stepped away from this industry completely when I was doing nutrition. I was like, it's good to fly the flag for experience and wisdom and age, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the grey hairs and the wrinkles now. And the work.
It's great. I mean, more power to you, and I'm very pleased to see it.
Got a little plaque on my my bookshelf behind me at home.
Oh,
pride
brilliant.
of place.
Yes, like it. Now, what did the judges particularly like about your entry? What was it that caught their eyes?
So I went for breakfast with one of the judges last week because we connected anyway. We wanted to kind of meet each other in real life, and I was asking her how, and she read my submission. And the thing that clinched it, because I applied a couple of years back when I first joined EY and I didn't get it. It was one of those things I was like, oh, whatever, like, it doesn't matter. And I was like, this year I would apply. And it's one of the things that you have to apply for. It's not just kind of given out willy-nilly, you have to apply. And I thought I've got a much stronger story to tell in terms of numbers, in terms of results, in terms of what I've done at EY. It's worth another crack. And she said that was good. But the bit that swung it really was the stuff I do outside of EY, particularly around when I was doing Glorious Wellness and coaching people in our industry, basically with health, wellness, nutrition, to be better thinkers and better creatives. She said it was that was actually the most interesting, engaging bit, like giving back to the industry. And I thought that was like a throwaway line or two, but she said, no, it was that. I was like, wouldn't have even thought of that.
It does set you apart, though, doesn't it? Because, I mean, there's lots of very capable CMOs out there delivering good work. But if you've got a side hustle or something extra, and particularly something that gives back as well, it can be quite powerful. It's partly why I love doing the podcast, actually, alongside my day job at System One, because it really energizes me, and it gives, it just creates a bit of value, hopefully, for other people alongside what's expected of me in terms of the job title and stuff.
Well, my side hustle's changed a bit, because with Glorious, I was doing it. So when I left Coke, I got a redundancy package. I'd been training in nutrition on the side, which was a bit of someone said your cognitive dissonance must have been very strong. I was like, I don't even know what that means, but basically selling sugary soft drinks for a living and then studying nutrition at night was, left brain and right brain were having a bit of a conflict. But anyway, I left Coke, I set up Glorious Wellness, and for a chunk of time, I did nothing but that. It was my, 100% bootstrapped it, built my own website, all of that sort of stuff. And then I got kind of sucked back into freelance mode, because cash flow of bootstrapping a new business is fairly critical, right? But I built Glorious Wellness over 6 years, and when I took the job at EY, I didn't have enough brain space to devote to clients anymore. I had EY clients, I couldn't cope with like the mental load of having private clients as well. So I've kind of sunsetted it for a little bit. It will always be there in the background. I'm like, it's never going to go away. But for now, it's not taking up much of my time. But my other side hustles have grown, like working with EY Foundation and mentoring and volunteering. There's loads of other stuff I do. So it's kind of, I think getting energy from something other than the day job is really important, whatever shape that takes.
And talking about kind of getting energy as well, around that time, is that when you did your TED talk?
I reckon TED was about 6-7 years ago. when I did a TEDx. I did a TEDx talk and then I got invited back to host TED and like be the compere. I mean, the comparing's brilliant because you're just like master of ceremonies. You can have a great day out on stage with a microphone kind of swanning about, and you don't have to memorize 15 minutes of monologue, which is the scary bit of a TEDx talk where you don't have an auto cue, you don't have prompt cards, you have to memorize that thing. So not all TEDx is like 15 minutes. Sometimes they're 7, sometimes they're 12. Your max is 15. But just the pure fear and adrenaline of standing on that red dot in the middle of the stage thinking, I've got to remember all of my words for the next 15 minutes is petrifying. But I am so proud of it. I'm so glad I did it. I never thought in a million years I'd get it. And I got a phone call from when they screen your application, I got a phone call from one of the people who were screening. Tell us about your angle, what's in it for the audience, what's unique about it, you get a bit of a grilling. And I had that interview and I thought nothing more of it. And then I got a phone call a few days later saying you're in. And my first thought was, I'm not allowed to swear, am I? What the F have I done? I'm so petrified at the thought of doing this now. So, I mean, I look back and think, well done you for taking a risk, for doing it anyway. And, it opened a lot of doors in terms of getting comfortable on stage, which has been an interesting avenue.
So, I mean, obviously you'd have been doing lots of talks in Coke and, before that as well. So you're obviously used to being in front of people, used to talking. What was different about doing a TED Talk? Was it the fact that you had no notes or auto cue and you had to...
That's a shocker.
Is that the thing?
The difference is, we were talking about our comparative lives at Coke and Pepsi a few minutes ago, but when I was at Coke, you would be on stage every year at like the big fancy conference when you're unveiling your great plans to all of the kind of bottling partners. So I was happy being on stage and quite comfortable presenting. With TED, because it's a personal story, first of all, and mine is a really personal story. I open up my TEDx by saying, I want to tell you about my Coke days. Imagine standing in front of a room full of people and you get a nosebleed. That's how I open my talk. And everyone's like, what? Like, she's a cokehead? And then I go on to talk about Coca-Cola and acne and Roaccutane and all of that kind of stuff. But I learned with TED the power of an opener. I learned about pacing and body language. I did have a speaker coach for it because I was petrified of it. But I also learned, like, years later, and this is at Samsung when I was on stage launching the Galaxy Z Flip to 3,000 tech journalists. I had a speaker coach then who taught me so much more. And I was like, if I knew this when I did TED, I think I would presented TED differently. But it kind of doesn't matter because I think you learn what you need to learn in that moment. So with TED, it's different to being on stage at Coke because it's not auto cued. You don't have prompt cards. It's a personal story. You're really looking at the people in the audience, like look them in the eye, and like you can see they're willing you to do well. Like there's a completely different vibe. So it was such an experience. I loved it.
I'd love to know. So when you were presenting to 3,000 tech journalists, that's quite a scary thing as well, isn't it? Unveiling one of the biggest innovations, I assume, in Samsung's history. What did you learn from that experience as well?
Oh, that was the pinnacle really of my time at Samsung in terms of achieving what I'd set out to achieve. So we can talk about, like business results, and we were talking a minute ago about NPS scores and brand share, all of that kind of stuff. But I didn't want a job at Samsung to begin with because I'd set up Glorious Wellness. I got a call from a friend who was working there and he said, will you come and help me a few days a week? Like, we need some bench strength. Come and sort some stuff out for me. I said, as long as it's not full time and as long as it's not permanent, I will come and freelance for you. So I was kind of in a cupboard under the stairs at Samsung doing all the stuff that nobody else wanted to do. And I got invited to a corporate away day in that first summer that I was there. And it was all the corporate cliches. I found myself on a beanbag, in a teepee, in a field in Hertfordshire. I'm like, how cliche can we get? And on stage was one of the big bosses. He's the VP of the UK business at the time. And he was talking about two things. One, they were really struggling to attract a younger female kind of crowd. Like, they couldn't understand why Samsung wasn't attractive to female millennials. And then on the other hand, he showed a photograph of a project team. And this was when folding phones were kind of just a glint in their eye. He'd come back from a trip to Korea, and this was the project team, and this technology was coming. Wasn't it amazing? And the picture was all men. And it was all either They were in their 50s, they were all wearing suits, and they were either Korean or kind of Western looking. And I just felt in that moment like the hairs on my arm stood up, and it made me so cross. And I was like, is it any flipping wonder that you're not attracting a younger crowd when who's making the decisions? You're not in tune with your audience. It's so obvious. So I hoisted myself out of my beanbag, at the break when you're like trying to most ungainly fashion get out of your beanbag. And I grabbed this bloke by the shoulder who did not know who I was because I was a nobody. And I said to him, is it any wonder you're not attracting the right crowd? Like, look who's making the decisions. And he said, well, come and help me change it then. And in that moment, it was a bit like the TED Talk. I was like, what have I just gone and done? I don't even want a job here. I just want the cash flow to fund Glorious. And the long story short version of this story is that man became my boss. He has been a mentor and a coach and a guide to me. And he knew, because I spoke about that experience, that my job at Samsung was to open doors for other women and to open doors for a conversation about diversity in our marketing and to tune into the consumers that they wanted to attract. That was my job. So fast forward 3.5 years. Now in that interim, being a woman in an industry like technology and Korean tech is pretty full on. Like there's all the cliched things that happen to me, like being the only woman in the room, being talked over, being shut down in like mid-conversation, you name it, it happened. But by the end of my 3.5 years, with support of the people around me, I'd got through a lot of that and I'd opened doors for other women. Now, when I got a phone call about, could you come to San Francisco? Can you open the show for us to launch Samsung Galaxy Z Flip to the world? And I was like, wait a minute, this is what I've worked for. But I also knew that in a year or two's time, I was leaving Samsung because my boss and I had conversations about succession planning, and I knew that my future career wasn't going to be at Samsung for much longer. So when I got the call, say, would he come and do it? I phoned him and said, I've been invited to open the show at Unpack in San Francisco, but we know that I'm not going to be here for forever. And he's like, get on that plane, go and do it. This is everything that you've worked for. If you can go on stage and show everybody else that if you can do it as a Western woman and not a Korean bloke, which is who would normally open the show, your job is done. Like you've opened as many doors as you possibly can. So to be able to walk out on stage, and I was the first person on stage, like the big music comes on and the lights come on and I'm waiting behind the scenes. Like the adrenaline rush is extraordinary, but I was so trained and so ready and so prepared. I'm like, I'm just going to enjoy this. And I went out there, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually here. So it's kind of like, it was a nice bookend to like the start of, a chunk of my career at Samsung that I never thought I would have. I never really wanted to be there anyway.
Well, that's an amazing legacy. And well, all power to you for having the courage of your convictions as well. And sometimes we tell ourselves we can't do things. And the fact that you went up to him and said, you want to change how this is really powerful.
I don't think he quite knew what to say, but he was extraordinary in terms of support, mentor, door opener for me.
Well, finding a good mentor is really important, isn't it? And then actually because you reminded me, because our careers sort of overlap for quite a time, actually, because I know you were at Coke for a few years and I was at Pepsi/Britvic. I had a similar moment to that, not as profound in terms of equality, but I was on an away day, a bit like you were describing on the beanbags, and it was this management development thing. And there was a really simple thing that struck me, that someone put up this really simple Venn diagram, 2 circles overlap. One was, what are the big issues the company currently faces, right? Mm-hmm. And the other one, what do you care about most? What are you passionate about? And we had to fill in both things and then obviously find the bit that overlaps. What's the one thing only you could do in this organization to make a big change and a big difference, right? Mm-hmm. A bit like you were doing that for women. And I remember sat there thinking, well, Britvic at that time had been very famous for innovation. We'd launched Fruit Shoot, we'd launched J2O, we'd launched Juicy Drench. We had this series of successes. In fact, I worked out that 100% of our growth had come from brands that never existed 10 years ago, sort of thing. And I also looked at what I was passionate about, and I realized that the thread through my experience was I loved innovation. I loved being the challenger. Mm-hmm. I would rather be on the brand that no one's heard of than the market leader that everyone's mm-hmm. trying to take over from, right?
Yeah.
And I just realized that, oh yeah, I get excited when I'm in the challenger position. I don't get excited when I'm in the brand leader position. So I came up with this thing saying, I'm going to go and solve Britvic's innovation problem. And the solution to the problem is not that it doesn't have good ideas. It's it can't execute it because it is so dependent on big brands being in Tesco on half price promotion that it's never going to give any time and attention to these small brands. So same as you, I remember like Friday afternoon from the beanbag, and then I was in like a cold kind of, office in the middle of a, industrial park on Monday morning, 8:00 in front of the two of the board members of Britvic. I phoned them up on the Friday. I said, I must meet you and tell you my vision. And I remember getting the flip charts out in this breakfast meeting going, doesn't feel the same anymore.
You're like so full of conviction on the Friday.
I felt like kind of that guy in Gladiator kind of thing. I'll do big rousing speech.
I know what you mean about that challenger piece though. Because I think with Samsung, there was a massive opportunity because the ambition, I worked in the mobile division mostly. I also worked in consumer electronics like tellies and fridges and stuff, but mainly mobile. And like everyone had like in their sights that we're going to be iPhone. That's all that mattered. To go from being seen as kind of a slightly, in fact, when I first joined, I did some focus groups, and I remember someone saying, as one of the kind of younger women in the group, Samsung is a brand for men with briefcases. I was like, this is it, right? You got to take a brand that's the perception and change it into something different. And it was, on Coca-Cola, on the itty bitty brands around the edges that no one really cared about, is where you can have the most impact, where you can do stuff that's not been done before, or they don't really care so much about. Like, yeah, do it, fine, crack on. I quite like that too.
Well, you get a whole lot more freedom, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a debate I often had with my colleagues at Britvic, because I then set up a team that managed Lipton iced tea, Mountain Dew, Gatorade. It basically all those brands in the PepsiCo system globally that have been neglected, and these were like billion-dollar brands, right? These are really, really,
in any
really
other
big
organisation, they're massive, right? But in there, they're like, they're the carpet sweeping.
Exactly. In any other country, any other market, you'd be like, God level to work on those brands. You know what I mean? And I went and spoke to the people within the Pepsi system that manage those brands, and I went, oh right, so you're just about to shoot a big campaign with Hugh Jackman. You just got this, this innovation pipeline that goes on for 10 years. That's really exciting. I suddenly realised there's this world out there that didn't exist. So basically, just went to Britvic and said, let me manage these brands.
Let me loose on them.
Yeah, basically. And what we did is we created our own from idea through to in-store. So the funny thing was actually where most of my money got spent were on van sales. It's very unglamorous actually.
On vans?
On vans, I know. It's like, it was quite funny though. When we went, it ended up becoming quite kind of iconic within the Pepsi system, because what I realised, they didn't know how to execute new brands. They were great at, I think, lift and shift, they called it.
Well, like the little nurture brands. Like
all the new ideas. Like, I mean, I think so Coke at the time had just bought vitamin water, some big 4 billion deal or something. And we had responded by buying a £7 million, sort of London-based, V-Water brand. Sort of like,
I mean, it's like V-Water and vitamin water. It's like we literally just live parallel lives.
Exactly. So there was me with my 7 million up against the 40 billion, so 4 billion. So I think it's quite funny.
But what was interesting about Coke in that period of time was that the vitamin water team would treat it, and they were, that team was run by an amazing woman, where they were not sucked into the mothership. They had a different bit of the building. They did their own thing. So it was actually probably one of the ways to navigate that sort of, the huge enterprise that is Coke, is by just carving off. Same with Relentless.
Well, it was fact. This is my study. I obsessed about looking at the data, and I did an analysis of 10 years of soft drink innovation. And what I worked out is that the brands that are successful year one are very rarely the brands that are successful after 5 years. So the exception was Coke Zero launch. The Coke Zero, because it was anchoring off the mother brand.
Yeah.
And even that, so what I worked out is even if you take the most successful soft drink launches, 50% of them declined in year two. Even Coke Zero. And then it kind of had a relaunch and another relaunch, and eventually it kind of broke through and became a success. But that was very, very unusual. Most of the biggest brands, once you take a 10-year view, didn't even make the top 20. So like Relentless were just focused on garages. Red Bull were just focused on pubs. Fever Tree were just focused on cocktail bars. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What they all did uniquely is prove themselves in one market and be absolutely brilliant at that one piece. But that was so countercultural for Pepsi, and I think for Coke as well. I had the same problem, is that they couldn't compute the idea you'd only sell 1 million cases in a year. So.
I mean, we counted in million unit cases.
Yeah.
So if you weren't hitting a million unit cases on anything, be like, well, it's not worth getting out of bed for. So you had to be like in the multiples of that for anyone to even listen to you or to have a conversation with you, which is a really interesting thing when you think about it. And when I was at Coke, I worked on the innovation stuff. Again, we lived parallel lives. Nestea, Aquarius, Oasis are like all
literally
your polar opposites in a funny little corner of the office in like the weird kind of corner by the toilets. Then I went onto the Coke mothership, and I call it the mothership because it kind of is. I worked on Red Coke, I worked on the Olympics and on FIFA World Cup Trophy Tour, and it's such a different animal because it's really about the magic that goes magic/marketing, could debate that, goes on around Coke, because Coke doesn't change, right? So it's everything is in what's next, what's new, what's innovative. How do we, like, when emojis were just coming out, how do we create a campaign in emojis? I mean, this stuff now, I look back, I'm like, I mean, it's genius because you don't even know what you're getting into, but you're trying to push the boundaries so that people engage and get excited by it. But it is quite short term.
Yeah.
So you're like, that's this year's thing.
Yeah.
Did you remember digital printing on bottles and cans?
Yes. Didn't you at that time was it the name on your Coke bottle?
Coke, yeah.
Share a Coke, where you could find Rebecca in store would be on there.
Yeah.
And then you'd have all these people snapping photos of, Rebecca and John together in store with their own bottles kind of thing.
Yeah. That went nuts. That was a small pilot in year one, and then we rolled it out across multiple markets year two. I mean, you can imagine the complexity of that.
Yes.
And then there was a thing where you could order you could order names if you couldn't find it in the store, but like to get everyone out looking for their own names and photographing and sharing it, I was like nuts. It was absolutely nuts.
Well, I've got a weird insight into that because when I'd left Britvic and gone and done a private buy-in of a small juice company, so I'd gone to try and make my millions. It didn't work out in the end, but I was attempting to. Hence why I'm here chatting to you, which is great, by the way. And our label supplier, Berkshire Labels, were one of the, I think, 37 approved label printers for Coke, right?
37 of them, yeah, that'd be about right.
It was something like that. Anyway, he came to me and I was moaning about the Pantone of our juice, but he said, John, this is nothing compared to Coke. I went, what do you mean? He said, we had a conference, all 37 of us, and we compared our labels. Everyone was different. I'm like, oh no. And so he was saying how they were under strict instructions to try and unify across these 37 different printers.
There'd be some brand manager having an absolute headache, not me at that point in time.
Yeah.
It was slightly different, slightly off, slightly different Pantone.
And he went in to explain all the different substrates and printing techniques and whatever else that ends up, that what you sign off compared to what actually goes down the line can end up in 37 different ways.
And if it's got Olympic rings on it, it's really hard as well because you haven't got enough Pantone colours to get everything right. So many conversations about Pantone colours on Olympic cans.
But he was the printer that did that for the UK. So he was explaining to me that he had to invest in a brand new line to be able to do this and take part in it. And he was explaining to me how he could personalise it. So the reason he was coming to me was, I've invested in this mass personalisation, right? But Coke have now finished it, and I've got this ability to personalise.
We've moved on by then,
He's like, can you do anything with it? And
Marmite did it, Toblerone did it. We're like, oh, everyone's doing it now. We're like, we did it years ago.
I know.
So because the printers were like, come on.
How much can we personalise? Literally it's there. It's brilliant. Right, I'd love to get into B2B, right? Because how on earth do you end up in B2B? Was it ever on the bingo cards? And how's marketing perceived in a B2B organisation compared to B2C?
It's a bit like with Samsung. I didn't really want a job in B2B and I didn't want a job at EY. But I have found the biggest changes in my career, the biggest kind of left turns where I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure this is the right thing to do, or like what part of the game plan is this, have been the places and the moments where I've learned the most. So like with Samsung, I knew in that moment on that beanbag that I had to do something, and therefore I was driven by the purpose of making it more equitable kind of inside and out. With EY, it was similar. So as I left Samsung, I went back to uni to finish my master's in nutrition. I got a bit of time after Samsung to do that, and I got a call about a job at EY, and I said to the recruiter, you have got the wrong woman for this job. This is so not me. And I kind of identified in my own kind of ego, I was either an FMCG marketeer or I was a tech marketeer. I was definitely not professional services. I couldn't see myself doing it. And she said, look, just go and have a chat. They're good, aren't they? The kind of, just go and have a chat. So I did. And literally the nanosecond I met my future boss, I thought, you and I will get on. Like, I know you. I've worked with you in a previous life. And I could tell that we would just be on the right wavelength, not necessarily the same wavelength, but on the right wavelength. And what attracted me more than anything was that he said to me, look, we're going to double the size of the business in the next 5 years. I'm like, wait a minute, we're a 2.5 billion business already. In the UK, we're going to double the size of the business in 5 years. That is crazy. That's Korean tech talk. So it's already like, that's the ambition that I'm used to. Oh, and by the way, we want you to completely overhaul everything. I was like, what do you mean? Like, well, our team structure, how we measure all of our marketing, how we do digital, in his words, how we engage with clients, like everything. We wanted to completely overhaul it all. I was like, well, I could go and do a similar job doing what I've done before in another tech company. I could go back into FMCG and do what I've done, which is like the big conferences and chasing the numbers and big sexy ad campaigns, or I can go and do something completely different. And that was what was most exciting about it. Now, I still don't think I'm very professional services. I'm still around peg in a square hole. I'm still the one that's going like, what about if we did this, or can we try something completely different that we've never done before, the category's never done before. But that's what's attractive. And that's why, 3.5 years later, I'm still learning, still enjoying it.
It's funny because back to our parallel lives, I've just coming up to 5 years in B2B.
Nearly 5 years.
I know, I can't believe it. I've never done a job more than 4 years.
Whoa.
So this is really weird for me. And the other thing I'm finding actually, I'm discovering the power of compounding as well. I wish I'd learned this a bit earlier, but I typically did 2 to 3 years in a job. 3 years was my average.
Yeah.
I did lots of jobs for 3 years. And then I felt I'd done it all, sort of thing. But actually having done 5 years, it's like the 4th and 5th year, pretty exciting.
Why?
Well, just things that just the cumulative compound effect of what I've been investing in.
Yeah.
So, because obviously people forget that marketing is more of a long-term game than a short-term game, particularly B2B.
I'm going to write that down.
Compounding. No, I've just discovered this. It's like I finally stuck around long enough to see the benefit of like compound interest. It's been a revelation.
That's really interesting from a marketing impact perspective.
Yeah. But it's like your marketing builds on itself, right?
Yeah.
And if you're consistent about it, and you learn what works and so on. And the return I'm getting on the marketing I did 4 or 5 years ago is amazing.
You're like, I was right. I made some good decisions.
I get to hang around long enough to be told I'm right as well, which is pretty cool.
Rather than, we had to get rid of the CMO and been here 2.5 years.
Well, I'm usually the one that gets turfed out, you see, because, we need an excuse who's out. But the interesting thing with that is, same as you really is, what I found in B2B is that people don't really understand you in the same way. Because in B2C, everyone gets the marketer, right? Of course, because you do the strategy, you do the brand plans, it's a product, so we're going to launch it on this date, how we're going to support it with consumers, how it's going to be in store. It's very obvious the impact you have. But I find in B2B, people don't really know what marketing is there to do in quite the same way as in B2C. So there's a lot more of having to prove how it all works kind of thing, and be patient because, we were talking before, weren't we, about the 95/5 rule?
Yeah.
Most people are not thinking about a B2B transaction at the moment.
And also they're massive, right? They're big transactions. The same with your contracts with clients. Yeah. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds. So it's not a decision that anyone's going to take lightly or quickly. So therefore the purchase cycle isn't, I've just seen a phone being presented by an influencer on Instagram, I'm going to buy it in a week or two. It is maybe 6, 12, 18 months away from someone thinking, oh, I need something, I'm going to go and talk to EY. It's the stretch is even longer. So actually the compounding thing is interesting in B2B because you're not going to see anything happen for quite a long time. It's not short term. Totally. What is it?
And that's what I've discovered. Because the purchase cycles are much longer, what happens is you get to the year 3, 4, 5, and then it becomes an avalanche because all those sort of, 2 to 3 year decision makers are suddenly in the market.
Yeah.
And it goes, and this is the weird thing is because people think it's weird at System 1 because we've gone 100% long, right? We don't do activation, right? And it's a bit weird. We take the Les Binet Peter Field thing. We've gone all in on the long. And, the weird thing is before we'd have to hard sell. We'd have to please buy our testing.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Do it now,
please,
special offer.
Exactly. Buy now. But because we've invested in brand, invested long, there's so much demand coming in that our problem now is fulfillment, not demand generation.
It's a nice problem to have.
I know.
Right?
100%.
Yeah.
It's great. But I've sort of because spending kind of first 2, 3 years really, really, really focused on brand and how we build a reputation and how we build a great product and how we do all those kind of things. And then realizing because of the compounding effect, it then avalanches much later.
That's really interesting. I never really thought about it in quite that way Because of that whole like CMO short-termism, which is not true, by the way. It's been proven that that's not true. Most CMOs are staying in role for at least 4 years now. So I think and I found this at Samsung, after 3 years, you sort of know what you're doing. And that you can navigate it well enough to be able to influence well. You've got the network, you've got the kudos, you've got the sponsorship and the stakeholders. It's really hard, I think, in any new job to start again and do all of that from scratch and then get your momentum going. So yeah, that compounding's my new word for today.
There we go, compounding. Yeah, no, it's true. And I think that's what we don't account for in businesses, is the loss of understanding how things work, relationship building. You know, the you get rid of somebody just as it's starting to work. This is often the case, isn't it?
Crazy,
Which is a bit mental, because you incentivize someone to stay for 5 years or 10 years. I mean, another example I always quote is Dom Dwight at Yorkshire Tea, for example. He's been there 10 years. And he said,
really been there 10 years?
And he said their tea, because he came up as, he was a social media handle. I mean, he always jokes about, he was the Twitter handle, right, for a few years. He was a journalist by trade, then he became the Twitter handle, then took over all social, then event, and then he'd be the CMO. But he would talk about the fact that management team had been the same for 10 years. Mm-hmm. But the compound impact of the fact they've stuck together, they've learned, and they've been through the downs and then the ups, and their business has gone from, I think, he describes it as 13% share to 33% share in a 10-year period.
Beautiful. I love it. I was on a judging panel with him for the Marketing Society Awards, sat next to him, and they had some of their work entered into the awards, and I think it's exceptional. Like it's so. Oh, you must have had a look at it through System One.
It's great. I mean, in fact, we regularly use that as case study, because if you look at some of the sort of core principles of great marketing, we'd talk about, in terms of like emotion and characters and fluent devices. And I mean, the fact that they own Yorkshireness, I mean, is amazing, isn't it?
And I'm a proud Yorkshire woman, so I'm like, got a little soft spot.
my only concern for him is like, dude, you must eventually run out of very famous Yorkshire people. I mean, we need Judi Dench on there next or something. You know what I mean? There must be like this short list.
We need to have like an academy of like up and coming Yorkshire famous folk.
We've had Dynamo.
Purely for Dom's like advertising campaigns.
Help Dom out, kind of thing, campaign going. So, but they're a great example of compounding, I think, because also the consumer gets to know the joke of proper, and so therefore you can tell that joke in more and more ways, as they go on.
The story gets stronger,
which is clever. So one question everyone asks, right, when you make the jump to B2B, is B2B really different to B2C, and in what ways is it different? Do you think how do you think it differs?
It's a kind of 50-50 sort of answer, I think, a 50-50 experience. I always say that people are people, right? They make decisions based on trust and values, and would you like working with that person? So I don't think that's any different whether you're in B2B or B2C, particularly like, talking about services. But what is different, and I think I hadn't quite wrapped my head around this when I first joined EY, because I came from like big budgets, big campaigns, a lot of kind of media spend, and it's not the same in B2B, is that the way that you influence is much more one-to-one or one-to-few rather than one-to-many. So without the kind of luxury of having a big ad budget, how do I influence the people that are going to make decisions that are like hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions? It's by spending time with them. It's by getting people from EY to spend time with them. It is much more of the being in a room with them, virtual or otherwise, in real life. And it's understanding what they are worried about and being able to respond to that. So a lot of it's quite niche. So I think there's a degree of precision required in B2B. And that's also a juxtaposition, because there's a degree of precision that I found that's needed to really, really understand who you're trying to influence. But it's also, EY is a vast organisation of 21,000 people in the UK alone. So 21,000 people across a multitude of services. We think about tax, audit, consulting, strategy, mergers and acquisitions. Like, we do all of these things. So how do you simplify that for people who are trying to understand what EY is about? So I think there's a piece of this. And I always joke, my first job at EY was not CMO, it was Chief Clarity Officer. So I was trying to make sense of this matrix of everything that we did. Like, how am I going to explain that to you? What does EY do? Like, how do I explain that to you? So I think there's some similarities. It's human to human first and foremost, but there's so many differences when it comes to nuance and being really precise and down here, not always up here.
I love the chief clarity officer thing, isn't it? I think we're having a parallel career. When I joined System One, I had been a client and I'd bought into what is now our most popular product, Test Your Ad.
Mm-hmm.
But when I joined, it wasn't called Test Your Ad, and I think it's called Predictive Market. I can't remember what it's called actually. Maybe Predictive Markets.
Right.
But we had something like 46 different products. And I remember on my first day, I asked everyone in the sales team to present to me as if I'm a customer sort of thing. And what I got was about an hour of methodology and, didn't even remotely cover the 46 different products. And I sat there and thought, I can't even explain it.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot explain this. So because I'm a really simple person, I said, okay, we test people's ads, we test people's innovation, and we track their brands. Let's call it that. you know what I mean?
So like, cool, he's good at what he does.
I know. So my
Genius CMO
my big contribution was just to like really simplify it into let's call it those three things, and then let's make it really easy, right? So
rather than overcomplicating it.
Yeah, exactly. So you just get this online report, and it just talks you through the results in a way that will be really obvious and this kind of thing. But you're absolutely right, is that part of our job is to bridge that gap between just because you know all this, and particularly in professional services where there's endless amounts of data and insight, and then you have to connect it with what does the customer need. They need the right information really quick in a way that they can understand, right?
They need someone to solve
Bridge
their
that
problems
gap.
for them,
Yeah.
or help them solve problems. They know what their problems are, they live and breathe them, and they need someone to help navigate those problems and bring together a team of people that are the best experts to solve what's probably a really complicated, again, nuanced, specific to that company problem. Like, how do you convince them? How do you show them that you can do that? That's the job that we needed to do. And so that's what we've got better at, is figuring out what is it that's keeping you awake at night? What is it that we can help you solve and show that we've done it before, but that we really understand your world? So it's much less about we're going to put something on TV, and it's more about how can we spend time in a room with you to understand more about what's really bugging you, and then have a way of showing you that we can respond to that. And that takes time. That is not you can't buy that. You can't do it quickly. You can't chuck, loads of performance marketing, and I know we hate that term, at it. Like there's a longevity to it in B2B that there wasn't in B2C, which was most of the time, for me at least, chasing a number, a big, hairy sales number that we needed to hit for that product launch, for that month, for that, for that quarter's results. There's obviously commercial pressure in EY to hit big chunky numbers, but the burn is a lot slower.
That's really, yeah, I totally recognise that. In a way, there's good and bad with the number thing, isn't it? Because in FMCG, because you're on the hook for a launch, a million cases, if it was a Coke or whatever, it's very clear. Success and failure is very clear. And by when.
White,
and as a marketer, you're pretty much on the hook for it. So you're basically hero or villain, and it's very, very black and white, isn't it? So a lot more nuance. So you talked about 21,000 colleagues. I think you got 1,300 partners in the organisation as well. Equity partners, right? That's a lot of people to influence. So how do you go about, with your clarity that you've brought to the organisation, influencing such a large organisation where presumably there's multiple people that have a say in what gets done?
Like everyone's got an opinion on marketing. Well, it's working a partnership, and it's that times a million. So I had, again, with the job that I didn't want at EY, I hadn't really wrapped my head around the structure of partnership. So when I worked at Samsung and at Coke, really, you've got one person who will say yes or no to something ultimately. Go and take a business case, you have a conversation, you jump through a few hoops and be like, yes or no. It's not like that when you've got 1,300 owners. So we've got 1,300 equity partners, then a load of salary partners, and then we've got another 20,000 people besides. So there isn't such a clear decision-making kind of tree. So what I learned really early on, with guidance from my boss, the guy that I went to work with, is like, you've got to pick the people who've got the influence and who've got their ear to the ground. So who are the people that will influence others that you need to have on your side? Who are the ones that don't believe that you can do any of what you're saying you'll do and are going to be the massive dissenters? Go and talk to them. Who are the people that are going to be like your biggest, cheerleaders, supporters, like get in there with you? Like, you have to go in literally one-to-one with all of them. So I figured out really early that I needed like an unofficial board of about 30 people. So every decision, I'm not saying every decision, but team restructure, marketing investment model, how are we going to measure what we treasure? Like there was certain things I would take to them and say, tell me, like pull it apart. Tell me what you love. Tell me what you hate. What am I missing? Who do I need to talk to? So the first few years I'd be like, oh, I've got to do it. Oh, I've got to go meet all 30 of them. But 30 out of 1,300, I think that's all right. And it was probably wasn't that different in Samsung. I'd probably go and have at least that many conversations, but it wasn't, I wasn't thinking about it in the same way. At EY, I'm thinking, I need to make sure I've covered them all off. Because if I go into the exec or I go into present something, I need to make sure I've got enough people in the room who are nodding. Like that, it's kind of I used to call it the back channels at Samsung. It's like the influence behind the scenes that you need to find a way to work. So it's basically that. That's how I get decisions made, is by having all of the one-to-ones. And the one time that I've not done it properly and I'd miss somebody off a list, it bit me on the arse so badly I will never miss them again.
But this is exactly what they don't teach you. Don't you think? What you've just described is brilliant. And I learned it probably 10, 15 years into my career. I was way too late. I mean, you were ahead of me on this one, because I was up for the high potential program at Britvic, where they
we had the same thing at Coke.
Did you?
Parallel universe.
This is a weird conversation. This is like the opposite. So we had this high potential program, fast track to director level, right? Yeah. And you went away, did this 3-day assessment, and it was the kind of thing I loved doing.
Where was your assessment?
Cranfield Business School?
Rio de Janeiro.
Oh, check you out. I'm in some, arse end of the Midlands and you're in Rio. Jeez.
We got shipped to Rio. I was like,
you went to Rio?
I love this. Yeah. Oh. We went to Rio for the assessment centre.
Did you pass?
Of course
you did. I know. Of course you did.
When you get there and if you don't pass, you really got a long plane ride home to think about it.
Well, two things.
You didn't.
Okay, I didn't pass. Actually, there were 3 things. So this is going to be therapy now, right? Just warning you listeners out there, right? 3 things really annoyed me. Because also, all the stuff we're asked to do was stuff I happened to be good at. It was like, write a business plan, present your idea to a customer, work on solving a problem. I love that stuff. So honestly, I do really, really enjoy it. So I was like, oh, this is great. Anyway, I remember I was sitting outside a room waiting for the next thing, and I could hear the assessors talking about me.
No.
Yes. And my boss at the time was called Belinda.
You got your ear to the water.
I literally, I was like, oh. And they were saying, oh, I'm sure if we spoke to Belinda, she would tell us that what he said isn't true. I was so angry because I'm like, I literally almost got Belinda on speed dial, was going to knock on the door and go, well, Belinda's here.
Yeah.
She can tell you about this thing I did, because they didn't believe in my case study interview, the thing that I said I'd done. They didn't believe it.
Really?
I was working in the international division. So what I'd done wasn't known in the main organisation, and it was absolutely true what I'd said, but they hadn't heard it. And therefore they didn't believe it. I thought it was really anyways, that's the first thing. Yeah. Second thing, in the psycho assessment, when I was sat down with the the psycho assessment. The psycho assessment. What's it called? A psychological test. Psych assessment. Sorry.
Psych assessment.
This is why I failed.
Are you psycho? Yes or no?
This is why I failed. Because then I sat next to the psychologist that had run the whole thing, sort of thing. And he said, according to my profile, under extreme pressure, I could blow up and be aggressive with people. And I said, but I've never in my life been aggressive with someone. Well, according to our assessment, you could, in a seriously tough situation, your personality type would mean you could become aggressive.
That's terrible.
Like, but I've never had any evidence of that ever. And I've been in some pretty horrible situations.
You're making me feel like I might want to blow up.
Yeah.
You psychologist.
Well, to be fair, that's exactly how I felt.
Maybe it's pushing your buttons.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. And then the third thing that sort of depressed me slightly was when I got that I was a near miss or whatever, or just slipped out below the line of whatever they
could have done slightly better. Exactly. Would have been in, but
they didn't really give me the feedback on why I'd failed. Anyway, but then I had a follow-up session with one of the assessors, right? And she said the reason I didn't get it was I hadn't managed the stakeholders in advance.
Whoa.
And I'm like,
you didn't even know that you needed to.
I'm sat there going, there's a whole game out here I didn't know was being played. I'm like, and then she said, you need this stakeholder map, which is who are the judges, right? Are they on your side or not? How much influence they have? Map it out on a box and work out who's not on your side but influential. That's your box. Go round and meet them before. Tell them all about the things that you've done and make sure they're aware of your project this and project that and so on. And it was basically what she described as like an election campaign.
I wouldn't have thought about that at that stage in my career, though.
No,
I didn't have that level
I didn't.
Like, you can call it politics, like political nous, like how organisations work. I would not have understood that.
I didn't get that at all. Now, had I thought about it critically, I should have realised I was in a part of the business where my work and reputation were not that well known because I'd done stuff outside the UK.
Yeah.
It was 60% of the business was in the UK.
Yeah.
And that's ahead. So my star was probably lower than other people's, just simply a virtue of where I was the unknown, and therefore I probably felt like a risk. So looking back, I probably should have done like a bit more merchandising of my success stories.
Merchandising of myself.
Exactly. But I just found out that I assumed they'd all take me on face value. And then
but also
didn't.
The fact that you run a high potential program, you think that they know what you're about.
Anyway, thank you for the therapy session. But listen to Rebecca here, because it is important that you bring people with you. And in big organizations, particularly, that navigation of who decides, and are they aligned, and have you getting feedback?
There's no shortcut.
The best example, I'll flip it the other way. What happened next is quite interesting, because I failed to get through. I was so annoyed that that was when I was on the beanbags coming up with my idea. It happened straight after that.
So did it?
So I was angry.
Yeah.
And I wanted to leave. And I literally was like, I was halfway out the door and then went on this management thing with the beanbags and thought, okay, I'll give it one last shot. I was prepared to walk if they said no. So therefore, because I wasn't afraid
you had nothing to lose.
I had nothing to lose. I went back in, and the irony was I got promoted to the level ahead of where the people that had been on the course were at.
You're like,
and there's this
suckers.
I know. There's this funny conversation where in the board meeting, so the thing had got approved, and I was therefore head of this department, a new department sort of thing. And the HR director had said to the CMO, who was sponsoring me, had said, shouldn't we give this job to one of the people that have just been through the assessment and passed? And he said, send any of them you like, and I'll give them the worst interview they've had in their life. You can't tell the architect of the building he can't build his own house.
You're like, genius.
I'm like, yes.
Bye-bye.
I won in the end.
Love
Anyway,
it. I love it.
Sorry.
It's that anger moment. It's like, I'm going to show you what you could have had.
Yes. Anyway, bring it back to EY.
Yeah, go on.
So, Brand Finance Award is insanely amazing, isn't it?
So proud.
You've just been announced as UK's strongest brand. How did that happen? And what did you do to get that as well?
So, I mean, it's such a proud moment for me and the team, and something I never really expected. But working back, when I joined EY 3.5 years ago, as I said earlier, Chief Clarity Officer really is what my title should have been to begin with, because figuring out what we needed to talk about and stand behind was crucial. And what we've done over the past 3.5 years, and interestingly, what you're talking about with compounding, we've been really true to talking about the things that matter most to our clients. So ask anyone in a big business, what are they grappling with? And the answers are quite obvious now, right? So it's AI, it's technology, it's the intersection of humans and technology, it is decarbonisation. So it's those, plus there's been some others recently, like supply chain issues, global supply chain. But you take the things that keep them awake at night, and what we have done consistently over the past 3.5 years is show them, talk to them about how we can help solve those issues. And some of it in a way that is very unexpected of EY. So, for example, cementing and building our reputation in the decarbonisation kind of services space. We were nowhere 4 years ago. It wasn't even a topic that EY was talking about. We took a few calculated risks. So we, for example, partnered with Project Everyone a few years back, so set up by Richard Curtis. And one of the things that they leverage is the world's to-do list. How do you help combat global warming through taking action? And we agreed to have on the side of our building an enormous post-it note that was 12 meters by 12 meters that was in support of one of the kind of world's to-do list items, so make cities sustainable. And we put that on our building during London Climate Action Week to make a stand and to say, like, we are behind this, we support this, but we have people who can help you with this. And doing that, it was, and you can imagine the conversations in the boardroom. You want to put a 12-meter post-it note on the side of our London HQ. Like, they thought I was insane at that point. But like, no, we're going to do it because it is going to make a stand. It's going to show the world we are in this space. And it got us on a panel with Sadiq Khan. It got us into a room full of, and this is a first for EY, there was a dinner, and it was with fashion editors, and it was all about green supply chains in fashion, which there's so much that needs to be done in that space. We just done a whole load of work for a client who had completely decarbonized their supply chain. So we had one of our partners, who's one of the sustainability experts, in a room full of fashion editors talking about the work that we'd done with the supplier. And I'm like, it's the first time ever that EY's been in that kind of space, in that habitat. So I think the brand finance accolade came after being really consistent, being really clear about what we needed to talk about, but doing some things like the giant Post-it note that got the most engagement on LinkedIn we have ever had, ever in the history of what I can measure, because it was something new and different for EY. So we've done something like that each and every year since, and it's getting us more attention and eyeballs and conversations with the people that are worrying about these things. So that's really, I think that's what's done it.
But in that simple example, you've made a serious topic engaging. I mean, in very simple terms, haven't you? And surprising by putting the Post-it note on the side. I mean, we were both in Cannes this year, weren't we? And we did a talk in the Palais on the extraordinary cost of being dull.
Yeah.
And I think I worked out for B2C that you'd have to spend close to £10 million if your ad is boring, right? In the bottom 25% on System 1. If your ad's there, you'd need to spend almost £10 million to have the same market impact as if you're in the top 25% of interesting ads, sort of
Which
thing.
is crazy,
Which
right?
is insane.
10 million quid extra.
If you had that extra budget, I mean, what could that get you? It'd be incredible. Anyway, B2B.
Yeah.
Way worse. Way
Go
worse.
on.
So firstly, only 9% of B2B ads would match those top 25 interesting ads on the B2C data. So we divide our database into B2B and B2C. 53% of ads would classify as extremely boring, as in the most, if you took the most boring B2C ads, half of B2B ads.
Listening to this are like, I hope I'm not in the 53%.
Exactly, we're not publishing this data, by the way. I'll have no friends after this. It'd be terrible. And the equivalent maths on that is like 25 times, like 260 million you'd have to spend to have. So those top 9% are doing amazing, like your Post-it note, are doing incredible hard work. And it's because it's unexpected and because the bar's so low, actually doing interesting, creative work in a B2B category can go so far. It's why people love it so much.
And it can't be, I think the other thing about B2B versus B2C is the budgets are much smaller. There was a kind of percentage of revenue that would be allocated to marketing in Samsung that is, I could only dream of now. So the percentage of total net revenue to marketing now, or marketing to total net revenue, is much smaller. So therefore the decision on what we spend it on has to be so much more considered, which is kind of, I mean, what you just said about dull advertising, that needs sorting, right?
Yeah.
Because there's less budget. You have to be much more choiceful about where it goes, but you also have to make sure it works really hard. I don't have loads of money to spend on big advertising campaigns. So everything that we do has to be working as hard as it can. Sounds so obvious, doesn't it? But a giant Post-it note worked really 100%. Well for us.
I mean, I had Greg Hahn on the podcast a few weeks ago, who's the founder of Mischief.
Yeah.
And he says to all his clients, you don't have the budget to be boring.
That's,
and it's just
a good mantra.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Right? And he's right, If you've got massive budgets, okay, you can sort of like swamp everybody with your message. But if you don't have a big budget, you don't have an option to be boring.
So be a bit brave.
So to round off, I'd love. What are your sort of personal lessons, reflections on your career, advice you'd give to yourself if you're doing again that kind of thing? Because being open about some of how it's felt and taking the risk, all that sort of things. I'd love, like, just to sort of, what are the kind of things that stand out that you'd advise somebody else?
The thing that we haven't spoken about, but is who I am kind of through and through, slicing me down the middle, is I came from a pretty average bit of Sheffield, an average comprehensive school. I had free school meals for all of my school life, right up until A-levels. And I talk really proudly about that background because the resilience and determination and hustle that I've got is a complete, result of that upbringing. I do a lot of work with EY Foundation now to help other, young adults from similar backgrounds to where I came from. But with that comes, I think there's I'm comfortable with being a feather ruffler and being different to everybody else. I'm really comfortable going into situations we've joked about it a little bit. I didn't want a job at Samsung. I didn't want a job at EY because in both those situations, I was like, this is totally a left turn. Like it's a massive, it's not the direction I was supposed to go in or that I thought I was supposed to go in. But the ability just to say, what is the worst that can happen? Take what's probably seems like the braver step, see what happens, learn some lessons. It's going to be great. And I think I've learned so much more from the big left turns than I have in what was a more linear journey before that, from advertising into FMCG and then into FMCG and then into tech, where I've taken bigger steps, bigger risks, you could say. The rewards have been greater in terms of my learning and the stuff that I've added to my CV and my skill set. So I think there's a bit in my TED talk where I talk about trust your gut instinct. Like, your gut instinct never lies. It is true. Your brain is way less intelligent than your guts. So trust what your gut tells you. Take a step forwards. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, because pretty soon after you take a step forwards, you'll know whether it's right or wrong. And I think that's the way that I approach opportunities that come up and have come up in my career. Just trust your instinct. It might seem so illogical in your brain, but trust what your gut's telling you, and it's probably right. So it's one of the biggest things I've learned, I think.
That's so true. I sometimes wonder, sometimes you have to tell yourself, if you try to make a decision, assume the decision's made and you're doing it.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Yes.
And then and then capture that emotion, and that kind of tells you in advance a little bit whether or not it's the right thing to do. And there's an element to which as well, you just don't know as well until you do it.
Do any of us? We don't really.
No one's got it mapped out. But I mean, back in the day when we were young, it's like you do this and then that, and it was all kind of mapped out. And then eventually you got the kind of paperweight at 25 years, in, and that was like
a nice paperweight.
Or you got your car park space, kind of with a little sign on it or something. Those days have gone, haven't they?
Those days have well and truly gone.
They have indeed. So trust your gut. Thank you, Rebecca. That's amazing. Been a real pleasure talking. Could have gone for ages. And thank you for the therapy. I feel like I've you've offloaded here. Someone who really understands what I'm going through here. This is great. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Thank you very much for listening or watching Uncensored CMO. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching, hit subscribe there as well. I'd also love to get a review. Reviews make a big difference on other people discovering the show. So please do leave a review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to contact me, you can do. I'm over on X at UncensoredCMO, or on LinkedIn, where I'm under my own name, John Evans. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.